All right, here we are, Kinesiology 230, Chapter 16, Presentation number 5, also known as the last one. Still talking aerobic endurance training programs. Now we're into types of aerobic endurance training programs, and the book definitely elaborates on a few of them. And we're going to spend a little time here, but in terms of chapter breakdown, we have types of aerobic endurance training programs. This is found on page 439. Talking LSD, pace tempo, interval, circuit, cross training, and arm exercises. Hold on here. Get myself out of the way. Good. All right. So with long, slow distance, and there's nuance here, and there's nuance here in the book. There's also nuance in the actual exam itself. So I ask you to make sure you reference this and pay attention. Long, slow distance should be performed at an intensity less than normally used so the duration of the workout can be longer. And if I remember correctly, you have to do a little math on some of these equations to come up with, is it a 6-minute mile pace for 15 miles, or is it a 6-minute mile pace or 6.5-minute mile pace for 12 miles, and the person wants to run a marathon? Well, is that proper for long, slow distance or not? And there's a couple different questions where they try to really dig into the nuances of this. So I urge you to kind of wrap yourself around this, and we look at this and go, all right, with long, slow distance, you're talking about an intensity that's lower than normally used, and you can run longer, bike longer, whatever the activity is. And it's a matter of just understanding if you want to run a 5K, you're going to do your long, slow distance day, and you're going to run 6 kilometers, not 5 kilometers, but you're going to run your 6 kilometers as a slower pace. They go into this in this part of the chapter, which I think it has its place elsewhere, but I want to point it out because it's basically called the talking test. It's something that we use in the industry. When you look at like heart rate reserve method, if you can't do that while you're running with the person, if maybe you're working with them, they have an option, right? They can either have a conversation or they have oxygen to perform the exercise. If you find that they're huffing and puffing and they can't talk and hold a conversation without becoming short of breath, then you know you've crossed that anaerobic threshold. You know that they've kind of crossed over in terms of percent. That's normally about 80%, give or take. So I know when I'm working with people, unless they're athletes, then I'm jamming them way across anaerobic threshold more often than not. But if I'm working with people from the general population, I utilize that talking test in the context of a workout. And, when they're working out, if they can't hold a conversation with me, then I know I've crossed that threshold. If they can continue to work and talk, etc., then they're underneath and it's more aerobic in nature. So you can use this, and I thought this would be a good thing to point out, but it's definitely something you can use elsewhere or use with your clients. But I thought it was actually a better passage to use elsewhere in the book. And, the heart rate itself goes beyond the training zone. The anaerobic system begins to provide energy, and we know this. We know we go past anaerobic threshold, past that 80%, it goes from being oxidative to being more glycolytic. And we know that there's a cost to be paid for that. And so you have glycogen stores that happen, you have an accumulation of byproducts, and then what ends up happening is people have fatigue and they end up having to quit the exercise bout. So once the client's heart rate begins to increase without an increase in workload, the exercise session is complete. What they mean there is if you work at a steady state and you're within this prescribed zone, but the heart rate continues to elevate even though you're working at the same work levels, what's happening is they can't keep up with the demands. The body can't keep up with the demands, and it ends up going from the oxidative side of the house to more the anaerobic side of the house. And so you get to the point where when a person is in steady state exercise, if their heart rate continues to increase, then you have to, I'm sorry guys, you have to stop the exercise or you're going to have to lighten the load a little bit. They note that for the beginner exerciser, this may occur only after a brief time of 10 to 15 minutes. And I would tell you that it just depends on what you're doing and how hard you're doing it. Okay. Pace tempo, intermittent, and steady state pace tempo. It's still pace tempo for all of them, but one of which allows for clients to train short periods at their goal pace, which will be higher than their current pace. That's pace tempo training. and there's nuance to this, and I just want to point this out. You're going to see it elsewhere. Then you have intermittent pace tempo training. You have work bouts, so it's kind of a discontinuous protocol where you go 3 to 5 minutes of work with rest periods of 30 to 90 seconds, and this is repeated until the pace can't be maintained. These are particularly grueling kind of workouts. And then you have steady state or steady pace tempo training. It involves one bout lasting 20 to 30 minutes, and it's sustained at the desired pace. So notice some of the nuance in there. They train for short periods at their goal pace, which will be higher than their current pace. Intermittent, you're going work, recovery, work, recovery, work, recovery. And then steady pace involves one bout of exercise lasting 20 to 30 minutes, they had commas placed, and it's sustained at the desired pace. So I can tell you, you're going to see that you're going to have to differentiate desired pace for steady, and then you're going to have to come up with a way to think of it in terms of higher than their current pace for pace tempo training. But up here, this is the passage from the book, Pace Tempo Training. This type of training allows clients to train for short periods at their goal pace, which may be or will be higher than their current pace. And then pace tempo training should be performed only 1 to 2 times per week. That's this one up here, pace tempo. And so I know they asked that question. I know it's something you're going to see again. They provide, side-by-side examples of workouts. If you want, you can pause me for a moment, just kind of take a look here. When you look at intermittent pace tempo workout for Miss Becky, you have intervals of 3 to 6 minutes. We're looking at 80 to 89%. We're going to be at about 8 METs, metabolic equivalent, if you remember those. And we're going to have recovery at 60 seconds. You're going to continue that protocol until she can no longer do that. Long, slow distance interval and pace tempo. So notice when you look at this, you have Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. So you have 3 different work days. And this is Becky again. And she has, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, excuse me. So you have Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday are the recovery days or rest days, or Floyd's rest days are Saturday and Sunday. Wow, couldn't get that out. But my point is, when you look at this and you look at the 2 different types of programming, you can see what happens here in terms of a type of training: long, slow distance, interval, pace tempo, interval, long, slow distance, pace tempo, and think through now what you're asking that person to do in terms of levels of intensity versus like interval, long, slow distance, and pace tempo. And just like graphically in your head, think in terms of one might be hard, the long, slow distance might be a little bit easier, and then you have pace tempo, which might be a medium. So you have like hard, easy, medium. Whereas Becky has Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. Long, slow distance is easy. Interval will be a little bit harder, and pace tempo might be a little bit of a medium, middle of the road type of workout for her. So you start to kind of quantify how these workouts look to your clients and how they look when you're working with people. So like interval training programs, they alternate periods of high and low intensity, and it's performed over a session. You'll have high intensity interval training, which is HIIT. Involves short bouts of exercise at intensities of 90% of VO2 max with periods of recovery. Now, these are typically written in terms of work to recovery ratios. Here you have 2 minutes of work, 1 minute of recovery. Could be 4 minutes of work with 2 minutes of recovery. The math matters on that. Yeah, so you're not beholden to 2 minutes, 1 minute. It could be 20 seconds, 10 seconds, pretty much like a Tabata style that you see in a high intensity training protocol. Or it could be 1 minute of work, 2 minutes of recovery. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish here. So it's a little bit of a math problem, right? But you look at this and you go, the benefit is you have increased workloads at higher intensities, which couldn't be possible at longer durations. And then the process of this is it requires a large contribution from anaerobic systems, because you have this recovery component that happens during the aerobic side. And usually when you get to these workloads, you're going to have this anaerobic component where we're past the anaerobic threshold. And the talking test matters here, because your people might not be able to hold a conversation as you're working with them. I said oxygen allocation. So it's a matter of how you're taking people kind of back and forth across that continuum from anaerobic to aerobic, from glycolytic all the way to the oxidative system and back to anaerobic. So you look at this and you go, all right, you can you can accommodate in terms of the recovery times. Like down here, you can have 1 minute working really hard, 2 minutes recovery versus 2 minutes working kind of a medium hard with 1 minute recovery. It just depends what you're trying to accomplish. If you make it where the work rest ratios are, 40 seconds work with 10 seconds recovery, that's going to be pretty darn hard. But what you have is the research supports that development of aerobic foundation before integrating in HIIT or high intensity training is of benefit. You want to have the foundation built first before you start to integrate these in, because you're going to crush your people in real simple terms. It's a matter of preparing your people for the rigors. And if you think back to that pyramid that we had, hypertrophy, base strength, power, peaking, you get into stuff like this, you're kind of up in the power part of the pyramid if we were to juxtaposition the two concepts. And so you need to have the foundation of putting some miles on first to allow your people to be able to tolerate work, but also have your people be able to utilize and understand the oxidative system for recovery when you have these hard workout bouts. And active recovery, walking, is much more beneficial than sitting around complaining about how hard the workout was. When you look at circuit training, it's generally thought of performing a series of resistance training exercises, but circuit training, can also include short bouts of aerobic endurance training in between sets of resistance training. This on the aggregate keeps your heart rate elevated throughout the entire process. And they give a good example here of like station 1, station 2, etc., of sample hybrid cardiovascular circuits. And maybe you play around with these in your workout. You can pause me here and kind of think through, but they give two different main examples of things that you could do. And you'll notice you'll have like battle ropes. Of course, it's you're using your arms and the muscles in your arms to move the ropes, but there's a aerobic effect to that. And you can just play around with the different elements in the gym and the different components to come up with a nice circuit style training. So cross training, it's a method of combining several exercise modalities to elicit an aerobic training response. You have to be aware of the levels of fitness for each modality. So if your client is not skilled on a BOSU, it's silly to put them on a BOSU and stand there and do like medicine ball wood chops. But the book provides that aerobic endurance cross training can be accomplished via two different means. And when you look at this and you go, okay, you can have different modes of exercise each training period, rotating through 2 or more modes within a week. So you have kind of this back and forth programming. And then the other is you utilize several different exercise modes within the same workout, which I particularly like. And the example they provide is as follows. And here's like a sample cross-training workout that they have. So Becky is doing 60 minutes on the treadmill, 60 minutes on the stationary bike, Friday, 30 minutes on the stair climber. And you have treadmill, bike, stair climber. So you have different modalities there. Floyd has 10 minutes on the treadmill, 10 minutes on the bike, 10 minutes on the stair climber. So he has 3 different modalities within the context of one aerobic workout. On Tuesday, he's got 10 minutes on the row machine, 10 minutes on the elliptical, 10 minutes on a treadmill. Again, 3 different things going on. And then you have 30 minutes on the stationary bike. You stay in the same thing the entire time. 20 minutes walking outdoors, 20 minutes on the rowing machine. Now, I use this example in a facility I was in before because they had 5 rows of cardiovascular equipment. And I've had people ask me, like, what's the best way to use it? I'm like, well, you could do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. You can do 10 minutes on each to give you 50 minutes. Or you can do 50 minutes on one day, 50 minutes on one the next day, 50 minutes on one the next day after that. Each time you do cardio, it doesn't have to be day after day after day, but each time you come in, you could use it that way as well. It's a way to inject variety into your workouts and different protocols into the workout itself. So arm exercise, a UBE, upper body ergometer. It's unlikely you're going to use one of these unless you're in a rehab facility. The book makes a point here, and I know they make a point and they reinforce it elsewhere, that when you use a UBE, you have to make a downward adjustment of 10 to 13 beats per minute when calculating age predicted maximal heart rate. I would love if they would explain this further, to help everybody out, but just for the context of our class, I want you to understand that you take 220 minus the age, that gives us the age predicted, then you back out another 10 to 13 beats from this to get the number. That's the calculation they want you to do. So with that, guys, I'm signing out. I'm right at my 15 minutes. I'm moving on to chapter 17.